Our theme this month is beloved community. As Reverend Doss pointed out, this is a rather vague ideal that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King envisioned as a society based on justice, equal opportunity, and the love of one's fellow human beings. The King Center, founded by Dr. King's widow, Coretta Scott King, defines it as such. Beloved community is a global vision in which all people can share the wealth of the earth. In the beloved community, poverty, hunger, and homelessness will not be tolerated because international standards of human decency will not allow it. Racism and all forms of discrimination, bigotry, and prejudice will be replaced by an all-inclusive spirit of sisterhood and brotherhood. Is it, though? Is the spirit all-inclusive? Let me share with you a story. Imagine a convention center, bustling with people from the same denomination, ready to tackle the work at hand. During a major session of this large meeting, a group of soldiers marches into the convention hall where the meeting was to take place, and they are greeted with derision, disdain, and despisement. They are booed, called tools of the war machine, and baby killers. Some are even spit upon. Overall, these veterans are not made to feel welcome. A lot of them feel left out, scorned, and hated. I know that when I heard this story, I was thinking to myself, gosh, that's awful. I mean, I'm a pacifist, a conscientious objector to all war, but even I would never stoop so low. It shocked me, however, to discover that this happened during the early 1990s, during the first Iraqi war. Even more shocking, it happened on the floor of the Unitarian Universalist General Assembly during the service of the living tradition, and when the military personnel were welcomed. So then this made me ask the question, does beloved community extend to those who have served and currently serve our country? I don't think it does. I'd like it to, realistically. The words by the King Center in the beloved community, poverty, hunger, and homelessness will not be tolerated because international standards of human decency will not allow it. Yet, 1.5 million veterans live in poverty. 40,000 veterans are homeless. Of the 40,000 homeless veterans, almost 25,000 of them are living in only temporary facilities. But that leaves more than 15,000 without any reliable shelter. Of that 1.5 million veterans living in poverty, how many are going hungry? How many of the veterans living in the street actually get a meal? How often? Let's go back to my opening story during the call to worship that I had with that homeless veteran. This occurred to me this last Thursday and actually inspired a furious rewrite of this entire sermon. I dropped my son, Jordan, off at Fullerton College for his last final, and I was so hungry I stopped off at Taco Bell to grab something for breakfast. I did not know this woman was a veteran until she tried to salute me. It was then I noticed that she was wearing some clothing items that would have indicated that she had served. Her description of the sand and the bombs and the Humvees would indicate to me that she had served in the current war. She wasn't that old, probably my age if not younger. She mentioned her children, specifically a son and a daughter. I gathered from the conversation that her son had died and that her daughter was missing, possibly an abusive or at the very least a questionable relationship. She was only cognizant with me part of the time, with the other part focused on talking to people that only she could see. I sat there shell-shocked after she left. No one else paid her any mind. The United States has not had a formal draft since Vietnam. We have instead an entirely voluntary military force. Growing up, it was said that you either had to have stellar grades to get a scholarship or you joined the military to pay for school. When I was in high school, I did what a lot of high school seniors in my class did. We went and lined up and we took the ASVAB test. I got my results back, and I'd be darned if I didn't get a phone call at least 5 or 6 times every evening from all 5 branches of the service trying to get me to join. I attempted to join the Air Force just after I was married at the age of 18 to my first spouse. I was denied actually at that time based on the fact that I had uncontrolled asthma. My husband, on the other hand, was able to enlist right after high school, just after the attack of 9/11. He had good grades. He had several advanced placement courses under his belt, but he wasn't counseled of his options properly, and the only option that he could see to pay for school was to enlist. He served 5 years before he was separated, and that's a whole other story that involves don't ask, don't tell. He tells me that of the people that he served with, a good proportion were from depressed areas of the South. They were mostly white, but there were persons of color with him. But they were of a very, very small minority. Racially, there was a hierarchy, and he encountered discrimination with this regularly. Many of the men and women he served with there were there for training and the educational opportunities that would be afforded to them afterward. Some planned to make a career of it, but most just wanted to serve their 4 years and then move on with school. Just this morning, on the way in, I heard an advertisement for the U.S. Army promising a significant bonus for enlisting. For someone from a working class background like me, that is a huge enticement. That means financial security and stability. And can you imagine receiving that much money? I think the bonus was $25,000 over the course of 4 years. For somebody who's 19 years old and just graduating high school with no other prospects, that's an incredible enticement. Neil Schister writes for the UU World that at the National Prayer Breakfast in 2003, then UUA President William Sinkford embodied the dual and for many contradictory strains that characterize the relationship between Unitarian Universalists and, if not the military itself, the exercises in military power. He said, "I come here with a great sense of gratitude. Thanks for the work you do and the protection you afford us, the democracy that you help us preserve." But he concluded he was also one that stood the vigil of peace, one whose fervent position was that the United States should only operate with the blessing of the international community, which at that moment we clearly did not have. Sinkford celebrated the United States as a work in progress, built around the dream of a community of equality. For the sake of promoting such a dream, he concluded many Unitarian Universalists, himself included, were willing to go to war. He qualified his stance with a somber proviso. Given the events that were just beginning to unfold, war is not our first choice, and in some sense, it always represents a failure. Most Unitarian Universalists would likely resonate with Sinkford's words, as well as the emotionally charged paradox that he himself finds himself in, living into, troubled by his government's actions and fearful for his own son, yet supportive of the troops. It is hard for us to reconcile the actions of our military to our own morals or even our 7 principles. How do we reconcile our desire to affirm the inherent worth and dignity of every person, or the justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, when the idea of war seems so diametrically opposed to those first 2 principles? How do we hold in beloved community someone who has taken a life in the service of this country? I don't have an answer. I wish I did. Just because I have the MDiv behind my name now doesn't come with this great breadth of knowledge that comes from on high. It just didn't. Tesney Taylor, a colleague of mine and fellow Meadville Lombard student, reminds me that suicide rates for combat veterans were way off the charts, and it is the leading cause of death in our military, surpassing the war itself: heart disease, cancer, homicide, and even car accidents. She wants to be a chaplain because she wants to be sure to keep soldiers whole and remind them that they have first names, that they have a soul behind the machine gun. She tells me that soldiers like herself are constantly faced with a crisis of faith, and that the number of evangelical and fundamentalist chaplains versus chaplains of more liberal faiths like ours are grossly outnumbered. She has served 2 tours in Afghanistan and remains a member of her state's honor guard, serving the families of fallen soldiers at gravesite funerals. The Reverend Julie Taylor, Senior Director of Contextual Ministry at Meadville, is also an Air Force Reserve chaplain. They go by the pronouns they, them, theirs, so that's how I'm going to refer to them. Their reason for joining the service was because they saw a need. At the time of their posting, there were only 2 active duty Air Force chaplains and 1 reservist. UU Air Force chaplains and 1 reservist. They echo Tesney's numbers and ask, who serves those that don't believe in a God? Who serves those having a crisis of faith? A need to connect with something greater, but not necessarily the traditional ideas of mainstream religion. Who's serving the nuns, the undecideds, the agnostics, or the others? Moreover, what about the service people who are of the LGBT community, who are more than often not, rejected by the fundamentalists? Who serves them? This begs the question, what do we as a community do with this information? And what is the answer to the question, can we welcome back into beloved community someone who we know has killed another human being in defense of this country in the line of duty? I would challenge that we should embrace and sit with that tension, because we're still in a war with no end in sight. We need to open our doors and our community to those possibly tortured souls who are likely desperate for some sense of normalcy. We need to embrace those who have lost loved ones in the conflict. By being a welcoming congregation and denomination, we can be a beacon of non-judgment and solidarity at a time when soldiers are at their most fragile and vulnerable. Reverend Doss did tell me, and he extolled the virtues of this congregation's work and welcoming of veterans and active duty service persons. And I have witnessed your collective efforts on behalf of female service personnel. The fact that you are willing to do so speaks volumes of your congregation. I'm curious, can you think of anything else that can be done? Some of you might know that one of my career goals is to enlist as a reserve chaplain in the U.S. Air Force. I mentioned I'm a pacifist at heart and a strong believer in nonviolent and diplomatic solutions with regards to our country's foreign policy. As a chaplain, if deployed, I would not be allowed to carry a weapon, though I can receive weapons training should I choose. I will instead have to rely on a chaplain's assistant or personal bodyguard to protect me in the field. You might be asking yourself, why would you want to risk yourself and place yourself intentionally in harm's way? Well, the answer is simple. I want to serve because I would hope that I can be an example to members of the queer community who might be terrified but still need pastoral care. I want to be an advocate for those who are the nuns, the undecideds, and the others. I want to be an advocate for my trans brothers and sisters who still worry about whether or not they're going to have a job tomorrow morning. I struggle with the idea of serving under our current president, but I also know that the needs of many cannot be dictated by the whims of a fallible man. I also think back to that woman I had breakfast with on Thursday afternoon. Did she have crisis intervention when she needed it? Could there have been a way to prevent her from being on the street, perhaps through both spiritual and emotional counseling and direction? If she had, could there have been something done to prevent her mind from breaking so dramatically? If she was reunited with her family, would she have the drive to seek the help that she needed? Or are we simply doomed to mourn her as a lost soul this Memorial Day? Beloved community is a global vision in which people, all people, can share the wealth of the earth because we as UUs have respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. In the beloved community, poverty, hunger, and homelessness would not be tolerated because our Unitarian Universalist principle of the inherent worth and dignity of every person is still something we hold dear. Racism and all forms of discrimination, bigotry, prejudice, and all of those things would be replaced by an all-inclusive spirit of sisterhood and brotherhood, leading us to justice and equality, equity and compassion in human relations, with the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Reminding us that when Reverend Singford said, "War is not our first choice," and in some sense, it always represents a failure, let us not fail our veterans. Let us welcome them back into our beloved community so we can have fewer to mourn on this holiday weekends, be they dead or be they simply lost and forgotten to the world at large. May it be so.